everyone, and welcome to our lesson on the effect of racial stereotyping. My name is Priyansha Das, and I am here to guide you guys through our lesson of what racial stereotyping can cause a person to do and how it really affects a society. So let's start off with critical race theory because racial stereotyping is essentially kind of a pillar of critical race theory. So essentially, it's a theoretical framework in the social sciences that use critical theory to examine society and culture as they relate to categorizations of race, law, and power. So what is racial stereotyping? It's defined as a system of beliefs that typically refers to a race, ethnicity, culture, heritage, status, etc. But how does it really affect a person? So according to an article published by the Nation's Health, racial stereotypes can fuel low self-esteem, which can also lead to weight gain or lower confidence in oneself, which is really detrimental, especially living in a society that we live in today. Let's rewind to the origins of racial stereotyping. So the first instance of racial stereotyping is said to be blackface. And blackface is essentially when a not African American person will paint their face black in order to imitate an African American person. So in an article published by the National Museum of African American History and Culture, blackface was considered an entertainment. It was a form of entertainment, or a comedic performance of blackness by whites in exaggerated costumes and makeup, which cannot be separated fully from the racial derision and stereotyping at its core. Obviously, these performances were incredibly disrespectful to African Americans and their culture, as it would characterize them as lazy, ignorant, superstitious, and prone to thievery and cowardice. Racial stereotyping through the years. So one would expect that as the years go on and as society progresses, our media and advertising would progress as well. Well, unfortunately, that can't be said. So on the left, we have an example of a political poster. On the left, it's the Democratic platform with a white man who seems very civilized, educated, and is really depicting the Democratic Party in a positive light. And then to the right, you see the Republican platform with an African American man who is very clearly disfigured and drawn incredibly disrespectfully, depicted as an uneducated and uncivilized man. And so on the extreme right, we see a more current example of racial stereotyping. And this is a little bit ironic, as the poster itself is saying stand up against racial stereotypes, however it's an Asian child holding up an F. So kind of defeating the purpose of racial stereotyping, or defeating. So then we turn to mass media. We turn to our favorite movies, our favorite TV shows, and we try to find some form of relief from the constant racial stereotyping that's happening in the real world in our society. However, gravely disappointed because most of the times racial stereotypes are used as the comedic relief in movies. So for example, 16 Candles. It was a huge hit when it came out, a very relatable movie, very funny movie. However, there was one character, Long Duck Dong, the Asian exchange student that came to live with Molly Ringwald's family, was incredibly offensive to Asian people, in the sense that he is depicted as a character that doesn't know how to speak English, a very slow character, someone who's really lost majority of the time, speaks in a very, very over-exaggerated Asian accent, and all in all just really disrespects Asian people in general. Then we move to shows like Family Guy or The Simpsons, where racial stereotyping is used to elevate the comedy. So essentially, the shows are centered around racial stereotypes. So in Family Guy, a big example of a racial stereotype that is very commonly used is Mort. He is the resident Jewish person in the Society of Family Guy, and he's constantly made fun of for his cheapness, his hair, his voice, the way he speaks, his wife, his son, essentially everything that has ever been said about a Jewish character, or every stereotype that has ever been made about a Jewish person has been incorporated into the show in the form of Mort. And then we move to movies like The Blind Side, which are essentially meant to combat the racial stereotypes, but they also serve as an amazing example and a reflection of what society sees people as. So, for example, the character in The Blind Side, Michael, he's a large African American man and living in Mississippi, and nobody wants to talk to him, nobody wants to be around him because they're intimidated by him, they're scared of him. Yet this one lady, who plays by Sandra Bullock, she comes and she gives him a home and she teaches him that, your race doesn't have to define who you are, which is a beautiful message to a beautiful movie. So it's movies like this that are really kind of progressing society in a positive direction, rather than using racial stereotyping as a comedic relief, but to use it as a tool to show people that this is really what happens in society. So let's move on to the novels, because we do have two different novels to compare and contrast. So let's begin with Passing by Nella Larson. So essentially what the novel talks about are two estranged childhood friends who grew up together. However, one of them had to move away due to a death in the family, and they haven't seen each other in a long time. The characters' names are Irene and Claire. Claire moved away with her family, and Irene stayed back. And both of these women come from mixed heritage, so part African American and part Caucasian. So this aspect really comes into play throughout the book. So the book starts years in the future, where Claire sends a letter to Irene, and they meet up, and Irene quickly comes to the realization that her old childhood friend has really drastically changed, because Claire no longer identifies as a mixed woman, but rather a completely Caucasian woman. And as the novel continues, we begin to see how Claire's life starts to unravel because of this lie. I mean, this lie is so severe that it extends to her husband, it extends to her child. They're all under the belief that she is 100% Caucasian. And Irene eventually says, I can't handle her, I can't be around her, and she moves on, and Claire tries to get back in touch, and it's a completely tumultuous adventure for both of them, and kind of how both of their fascination in each other's lives leads to an unraveling in their lives. And a big concept in Passing is racial passing, hence the title. And what racial passing is where a person will try to pass as a heritage or ethnicity or race that's not their own. So for example, Claire was trying to pass as a white woman, when in reality she was a mix. She was also African American, but she completely obscured that side of her heritage in order to fit in better. Now this kind of ties into racial stereotyping, because why did Claire feel the need to have to conform to society? Why did she feel the need to have to obscure such an important part of her heritage in order to fit in? If being a minority, if being a person of color wasn't depicted as a bad thing, maybe Claire's life would have been completely different. Maybe Claire wouldn't have been pushed off of a building by her husband after he found out that she is in fact a person of color. Or maybe she would have remained friends with Irene. Maybe her life would have been 100% different. And so racial stereotyping kind of leads a person into conforming. It leads a person into believing that there is something wrong with being a different race or culture or ethnicity from majority of the society around you. And so we see that there are many similar themes between the two novels, Passing and How to Kill a Mockingbird. Now, How to Kill a Mockingbird is an incredibly famous novel because of how game-changing its topic was. This topic wasn't really a very talked about thing in society at the time, but this book really brought it into perspective and brought it into the spotlight. And essentially what happened in the novel is that Tom Robinson is an African-American resident of the city of Macomb, and he is convicted of rape by Mayella Ewell. Now, he's given a chance at a trial, but we all know that this trial is not going to be fair simply because of the color of his skin. So it was completely irrelevant that Atticus Finch, his lawyer, presented amazing evidence, and evidence that quite frankly could not be argued with, that supporting the fact that Robinson was not a rapist and did not touch a hair on Mayella's head. However, even then, Robinson was convicted and he was charged guilty, regardless of the fact that the evidence and every witness evidence pointed that he was innocent. And in fact, it became so bad to the point that Robinson was later lynched and killed. And so this kind of ties into racial stereotyping, well, because, I mean, the whole case revolves around racial stereotyping. Tom Robinson, the only reason that he was convicted was because of his skin color. If he had not been an African-American man and was put into this situation, the evidence should have supported his case. The evidence would have helped him win. However, the simple fact that his skin color was not white did not play in his favor and unfortunately ended up in his death. However, we look at recent media and we look at where society is heading. And luckily for us, it is getting better. There are more movies now that are being released, like Crazy Rich Asians or Nappily Ever After, that really promote confidence in your heritage or your religion, your race, and they're teaching young children to not be ashamed or scared to talk about their religion or race. It's teaching them to be proud, which is something that we should really be working towards, and it's being seen in recent society, so it's good news. And so thank you all very much for listening to our presentation and sticking with us through this lesson on the effects of racial stereotyping on people and society.